Hello and welcome to this Henry Schein TechCentral webinar. Thank you for joining us, and a special thanks to all of you who are Henry Schein customers. We sure appreciate your business. My name is Alan Crow. I'm the Marketing Manager for Henry Schein TechCentral. I'm joined today by Corey Knockrenner from WatchGuard Technologies and Tom Grave from CTERA, both of which are leaders in the security industry. We're also joined by Brian O'Loughlin, Sales Zone Specialist for TechCentral. I will further introduce our presenters in a moment, but I want to thank all of you for taking the time to learn more about how to protect your patient data. For those of you who are new to Henry Schein TechCentral, we are the leader in dental industry for providing superior office technology solutions that are optimized and integrated for dental practices. Unlike other IT companies and retail outlets that simply sell computers out of the box, TechCentral works with several manufacturers, like WatchGuard and CTERA, to ensure that they provide the right equipment that will work for your dental office. We understand that your most important asset to your dental office is its patient data, and if you were to lose that data, your office would be dead in the water. That's why during this webinar, our presenters will explain how dental practices are being affected by data theft, ransomware, and cybercrime on a daily basis, and how you can prevent a cyber breach, being prepared for the inevitable attack, and how to cut down on the discovery and recovery time after a breach. There's a handful of widgets at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit your questions during the presentation using the Q&A widget. Download additional content via the resource list, and fill out a survey onto the right of your screen, which will help us better address the needs of the customers. Our first speaker will be Corey Knockrenner. He is recognized as a thought leader in the IT security industry. Knockrenner spearheads WatchGuard's technology, vision, and direction. Corey has operated at the front line of security for 16 years, and for nearly a decade has been evaluating and making accurate predictions about information security trends. We're very lucky to have him because he is a very sought-after speaker at forums and is a regular contributor to leading publications, as well as delivering WatchGuard's daily security by video on Facebook. Corey, I'll now turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Alan. And again, thank you all for joining us today to learn a lot about the security trends that are affecting many businesses, including dental practices around the world, and how you can help protect your patient data. So there's really two things I'm going to talk about today before we hand it over to Tom, and that is talking about how cybercrime really is starting to affect small to medium businesses, including dental practices and healthcare institutes, as well as talking about one of the number one threats that I think affects pretty much every business vertical in the world lately, including dental practices, and that's ransomware. So to start, I really want to talk about how cybercrime is coming to Main Street. And by that I mean it's affecting small businesses. Whether you're a dental practice, a healthcare clinic, or just a small mom and pop company, a lot of small businesses' typical argument against security is they think, I'm not a huge company, I'm not Tesla, I'm not Amazon, I don't have a ton of intellectual property, so hackers aren't after me. And frankly, I hope to share with you why that thought is actually quite wrong. But before I do, let's start with a polling question. I'd like to know how big your dental practice is. So if we could start out just by answering this question. Do you consider yourself a small business with 50 staff members, a medium business of around 50 to 150, or are you anywhere from 200 to 1,000 or over 150 and are a large business? So if you go ahead and maybe submit your answer to that, we'll see what the results are. So it looks like almost all of you so far are small businesses, so under 50 members, and I'm not surprised about that. The average dental practice I visited as a patient is really around 50 50 staff members. And despite the fact that you are among the smallest of businesses, that does not actually mean that bad guys aren't attacking you. In fact, there's plenty of statistics. These statistics I'm sharing here come from the National Small Business Association. Every year they do a survey of small businesses in many verticals. One of the questions they ask them is, how many of you small businesses have had any sort of cyber incident, malware attack, or breach? And as you can see here, the last survey they did, half of the small businesses out there said they had a breach. So this statistic alone should prove that even the smallest business does have security incidents. More importantly, by the way, they also try to estimate the cost of those for the small businesses affected, and according to data they gathered, around $20,000 is what a small business will pay once they've been breached, and whether that is to inform customers, to protect their network, to deal with legal issues. $20K is quite a significant amount of money for a small business to lose. Now, the good news about this is I mentioned that a lot of small businesses don't think they're a threat, and that is a wrong thought. The good news is small businesses are starting to understand that cybersecurity is important to them too. One other statistic, according to the National Small Business Association, is 42% of small businesses now are realizing or saying that cybersecurity is important, and that's up over 10 points compared to the survey they did before. And besides these sort of small business surveys where we actually seen if they're breached, there's a number of other anecdotal studies showing that many hackers out there are actually targeting small businesses. Now you might ask why. Again, the common sense might be, I don't think I have intellectual property and I'm small. Why would an attacker actually target me? But here are 5 reasons I actually believe cyber criminals are specifically targeting small businesses. The first is, small businesses tend to be the weakest link. Simply because of their size and resource, they tend to rely only on legacy security controls. They might have a old school firewall and basic antivirus and believe that in this threat landscape, that's enough to protect them. Unfortunately, attacks have evolved, and they really don't have all the protections they need to survive today's online threat landscape. So one reason is simply they're easier to hack. Bad guys can actually hack a lot of them much more quickly than one of the more protected large businesses out there. The other thing they often fail to recognize is they're an important part of a business ecosystem, something I call the chain of trust or the supply chain. As a small dental practice, you probably have plenty of partners you work with, people you order from, people that help you with your payroll, and some of those businesses might be larger organizations. One example I use of this kind of chain of trust is, you remember a few years ago when Target got breached, there were many headlines about the Target breach, and you think, wow, Target's a big enterprise, they got breached. The truth is, I consider that a small to medium business breach, because the one thing you may or may not know is the weak link that allowed the hacker to get into Target was a heating and ventilation company called Fazio Mechanical. And it was basically a phishing email that convinced that small business to give up a credential, and that small business was the weak link in the chain that allowed the bad guy to get into Target. So often small businesses are kind of the avenue to bigger fish. Also, small business attacks draw less attention. Some of just the dynamics of our laws around cybercrime, for instance, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, $5,000 is the magic number for when a certain type of unauthorized computer access becomes something that, say, the FBI has time to investigate. So just by going after small businesses, maybe extorting them for smaller amounts of money, it's easier for attackers to kind of stay out of the target of authorities. But really, one of the most important reasons why hackers target small businesses is you do have valuable data. In your case, it's your patient data. Even if you don't have intellectual property, that personally identifiable information of your customers is really the most important data you can have. Specifically, for instance, Visa has been studying breaches that resulted in lost credit card data. They monitor their PCI DSS customers, and if they have a breach, they look at who lost data, credit card information, information and how much. And according to Visa, 90% of the lost credit card information comes from small businesses losing that data, not large enterprises. So you definitely do have data that's valuable to these criminal hackers. And finally, the last reason that it's not quite as compelling because it's not targeted, but there are always going to be opportunistic attacks on the internet. There's always going to be the type of malware that just scan automatically for new victims, and they don't care if you're a grandma in Idaho or if you're a dental practice in Washington State. They simply want to gain access to your computers to see what they can steal. So those are the reasons that small businesses are attacked. By the way, one other dynamic that kind of affects small businesses is the fact that they simply do have less resources than larger businesses. A lot of dental practices, you may be lucky to have one IT guy. Perhaps you outsource your IT needs. But then when you think about the specific expertise you need for security, understanding the latest threats, understanding the latest security layers, the control layers that can protect you, most small businesses barely have an IT staff, let alone that security professional. So it's much harder for them to have staff that can help them solve their security needs, let alone the budget. And that's really where, great partners like Henry Schein TechCentral really kind of takes care of those issues for you. But this is a big challenge for small businesses. They're under targeted attacks, and yet they have less resources to deal with pretty significant threats. With that, I'm going to transition to ransomware, though. One of the number one threats affecting everybody today is the fact that kidnappers have gone cyber. And I throw up this slide that I think is kind of fun. Hopefully many of you have seen the Liam Neeson movie called Taken. And you might remember this point where he gets a phone call where someone has physically kidnapped his daughter and basically is extorting him for ransom. Now, citing this movie where you actually have a family member kidnapped may seem overly dramatic, but believe it or not, ransomware is a significant issue, even emotionally, for many, many people out there. In the case of patient data, which I'll talk about later, we've seen dental practices or even hospitals and health clinics have their data ransomed. It can actually cause life and death situations. Even when, a grandma in Ohio has her data ransomed, that could be family pictures that are unrecoverable to her. So it can have almost as much emotional impact as it does financial impact. And really the hopes of me talking about ransomware and some solutions out there is for me to give you the things you need so that you can deliver this cool Liam Neeson speech, which I won't talk about, but I just love that he had these special skills that made him capable of finding his daughter and taking her back without paying the ransom. So kidnappers have gone cyber. It's costing businesses a lot of money, and it's costing users a lot of pain, despite the fact this is in the digital world. Now, I don't think I have to define ransomware. I think many of you have probably heard of it simply because it's such a big threat that even mass media is talking about it. But essentially, ransomware is kind of a general term for any sort of malicious software on a computer that somehow locks up the computer or locks up your data and makes it so you can't get your data or use your computer without paying any sort of extortion. Now, ransomware, believe it or not, has been around since 1989, and yes, I said 89. There was actually a floppy disk piece of ransomware that was the first malware that asked for some sort of money or financial payment. But it really has become most prevalent since 2013 when a piece of ransomware called CryptoLocker came out. Since then, ransomware has been growing because bad guys are making money from it. What malware bad guys focus on is 100% based on how lucrative and effective it is. Unfortunately, ransomware is making them a lot of money. According to the FBI, in the first quarter of 2016, victims reported $209 million of losses due to ransomware. 1 quarter. If you extend that throughout the year, it's around $1 billion. And if you think about that, it's the FBI, so that's USA only, and it's only companies that are willing to report this sort of breach to the FBI. So the point is, businesses around the world are losing billions to ransomware. Recently, we, WatchGuard, surveyed our partners and customers, and according to even organizations like TechCentral, Henry Schein, 83% of those partners out there say ransomware is the #1 problem that customers will face this year. So it's a very significant problem. And it's one it affects all businesses equally. It's something that, the large business can suffer from, but as you can see here, it actually specifically has affected the dental organizations as well. Now, I'm not going to detail every single one of these examples, but you can see many here. For instance, January of 2015, during vacation, a dentist realized or got news that her patient data was being held for ransom. You guys are probably running busy dental offices, so you know how important vacation is. That would be a very rude awakening. Again, in March 2016, there's reports of another dental's office that was hit by Locky. Locky, by the way, was one of the most successful pieces of ransomware in the first quarter of 2016. And you can go on and on with these other dental offices as well. And by the way, healthcare, whether it be dental or just traditional healthcare, patient data is being targeted today. The National Health Service in the UK was recently affected by WannaCry. There's been many hospitals, whether they be in Canada or the Presbyterian Hospital in California, that were also hit by ransomware. I think bad guys unfortunately realize that patient data or lack of patient data can put hospitals or dental offices in dire straits, so they're able to get more ransom from it. So this is definitely a threat that's targeting dental offices and healthcare institutes directly. Now, do know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here for time's sake, but do know, as I mentioned, ransomware has been around for a while. It didn't really get successful until recently, but, it started as early as 1989. Around the 2000s was when we first saw the first type of ransomware, or kind of loosely ransomware, which is something called scareware. It was something that pretended to be a security program, told you had an infection when you didn't, and asked you for money to clean your computer. Shortly after that, we started seeing the first real ransomware, which was locking ransomware. This ransomware actually didn't encrypt your files, but it would seemingly lock up your computer. It wouldn't let you open programs. You would see a browser window with a message, and it would use all kinds of technical tricks to try to keep you from using your computer. And I can go on with other variants of ransomware, like some that embedded themselves on your hard drive, some that pretended to be the police catching you doing something wrong, and some that even send you use SMS messaging to ask you for ransoms. But really the main point I wanted to make is all those other instances of ransomware, which loosely happened around the 2000s to 2010, were never really that effective. And the reason why was probably twofold. One, criminals didn't have a good way to get ransom without being caught. And two, they weren't really effective at really locking up your computer. For instance, locking ransomware, a savvy technician could often use special boot tricks and get your computer back for you. But what really changed ransomware was in 2013, was with that last instance called crypto ransomware. And that's the specific term for ransomware that encrypts your files. And in 2013 was when CryptoLocker came out. There had been some encrypting ransomware before CryptoLocker, but long story short, before, the attackers were trying to do their own encryption, which the good guys could always reverse. But one of the main tricks that CryptoLocker did was it actually used, industry-grade AES, a very technical and well-known type of encryption, so that when your files were locked, they were really locked, and there were no easy ways to get them back without having a private key. So crypto ransomware is what changed the game for ransomware authors. By the way, ransomware continues to evolve. I mentioned earlier that it's going to be the #1 threat in 2017, but one of my predictions for 2017 was specifically how ransomware would evolve, and I predicted something I call a ransom worm. And what I mean by that, if you're not versed in the security industry, a worm is another type of malware. It's specifically a type of malware that uses network activity or network vulnerabilities and flaws to spread automatically. So you can think of it like a network virus. Once it infects one computer, it's then going to try to infect all the other computers in your dental practice as well. That was my prediction, which I made December 2016 for this year, that ransomware would start to leverage worm capabilities so that it not only would infect one victim, but it would try to spread throughout your office. Unfortunately, that prediction has come true with the WannaCry ransomware. As you probably know, just under a month ago, or I guess it might be a little over a month now, May 12th on Friday, I remember it because I was busy analyzing malware that day, WannaCry came out as a new piece of ransomware that quickly spread first all around Europe, and then into the U.S. as well. It affected some very large organizations like ISPs in Spain, but it also specifically affected to a big extent the National Health Service in the U.K. They actually had to at least divert patients from certain emergency services at hospitals because of the fact they couldn't access patient data. So I won't go into tons of technical detail about WannaCry, but really the reason this ransomware blew up is because it was that ransomworm prediction. It actually leveraged something called a Windows SMB vulnerability. SMB is just the fancy acronym for kind of a standard that Windows uses for file and network sharing services. And basically our government, the NSA if you live in the U.S., had a 0-day. They had an unknown flaw in this particular Windows protocol that leaked to the public because a bad actor stole it. And this ransomware leveraged that leak vulnerability to not only infect one victim in your network, but once it infected that victim, it would leverage that flaw to spread all around your network. And that's what caused WannaCry to be so successful among many institutions, as you can see here. I updated some of my statistics with the latest about WannaCry. On the slide here, you can actually see a chart that tries to map WannaCry infections. As of a few days ago, there were 532,000 victims that were infected by this ransomware. By the way, if it infects you, it asks for around $300 worth of Bitcoin to get your data back. One thing I find interesting about this ransomware is while it has infected a lot of victims, the bad guys haven't made a ton of money. Now, Bitcoin, the anonymous digital currency that these bad guys use to kind of anonymize who they are, while Bitcoin, you can't track who owns it, you can actually track the wallets these ransomware use. You can't hide actually Bitcoin transactions. They're publicly available in a public ledger. So by looking at the wallet that WannaCry is using, we can tell so far the threat actors behind it have only made $140,000 worth of ransom, which is really horrible when you think of the asymmetric amount of damage they've done to the organizations. The amount of damage that the NHS, Telefonica, and many other organizations will suffer because of this will certainly grow to the millions, if not some have predicted billions. So it's kind of a shame that for some horrible criminal attack that really is making so little, they're doing so much damage. So anyways, WannaCry is a good example of the evolution of ransomware, and unfortunately with its worm capabilities, it is getting better, or getting better at spreading worse for us. Now, the good news is, as scary as some of this sounds, the proper preparation can protect you. So I do want, before turning it over to Alan and Tom, I do want to share how you can protect yourself from ransomware very generally. But before I do, I want to share some myths or misconceptions about ransomware. One of them, the first I kind of alluded to before, having a firewall, a traditional firewall by itself, won't protect you. Firewalls are good at allowing traffic in and out, or allowing you to pick what traffic you want to allow, but if you're a dental practice, you're probably allowing customers to have web access or your employees to have web access, and you probably allow email. So the problem with a old school firewall is the things you allow have no protection. And that's why you need to start thinking about security controls like a unified threat management appliance or a next generation firewall. These are firewalls that have other additional layers of security, and those other additional layers are what are designed to detect and stop things like ransomware, even when you do allow the traffic that might help spread them. The other, misconception is simply the fact that you're not a target. Now, hopefully just by me talking about how cybercrime is coming down to SMB customers, that alone should convince you that even as a small business, you're a target. But ransomware, even more importantly, does not target at all. Every person that ransomware infects, whether they're a dental office, a consumer, or the biggest business in the world, is an additional ransom payment. So ransomware is just about the most widespread type of attack out there. The other misconception, unfortunately, is just having basic antivirus will catch ransomware. Don't have time to go into all the technical detail about this, but antivirus is one of the most common ways we catch malware, including ransomware. But a lot of traditional antivirus is based on known patterns, what we call signatures. We, as the security industry, have to see a particular piece of ransomware when it comes out and create a pattern for it in order for antivirus to block it. The technical problem is the bad guys or malware authors out there have figured out all kinds of technical tricks that allow them to kind of to change their ransomware, to take a WannaCry piece of ransomware, and even though it does the same thing, make it look good on a digital or different on a digital level. And by making it different, suddenly the pattern no longer detects it. So this is a long way of me saying you need to start looking at more advanced malware detection solutions that don't rely on reactive patterns, but rather use more proactive techniques, whether they be behavioral analysis or things like machine learning, just new ways of catching ransomware and malware the second it comes out rather than 2 days later. Do you know that although email and bad websites are one good way that malware authors spread things like ransomware to your computer, there are many other vectors for ransomware, including phishing and network attacks. Also know that ransomware, while most ransomware is targeting Windows platforms, it's not the only thing that's affected by ransomware. There are some Mac variants of ransomware out there, so they affect Apple computers as well. And recently, a lot of threat actors are focusing on making Android-specific mobile ransomware. And finally, don't always, first of all, you hear my tips on why you shouldn't pay, but don't assume that paying will get your files back. While a lot of ransomware do actually have working decryption modules, in fact, one of the ways they become successful financially is because they have to work, otherwise people will stop paying. Not all ransomware is the same. There are still plenty of ransomware variants where the threat actor doesn't care about fixing your files, and he just wants you to make that payment, and then you're going to be on your own. So don't think paying will fix it. With that, in my last 3 minutes, let me just really quickly give you 3-part high-level tips on defending yourself against this ransomware. To me, it's first about preparation because you'll never block every single instance of ransomware. Then you have to rethink your preventative services, some technology controls that can help you block ransomware. And finally, you have to have a response plan. So as far as preparation, my first tips are train your users, train your staff at your dental practice. Ransomware will often come just in an email that might have a weird attachment. Maybe it's a Word document attachment telling someone that handles appointments that they have a new bill that they have to look at in a Word document. You should train your users about some of the latest techniques bad guys are using to kind of lure them into either clicking on a document attachment, which might seem benign to them but isn't, or on clicking a weird link in an email. So training is an important part. The next thing you think of, if you manage IT at the dental office, you need to patch your software. Often malware, whether it be ransomware or anything else, it leverages software vulnerabilities in order to gain control of your computer so that it can install itself. And many of the vulnerabilities, in fact, over 90% of these flaws or exploits these bad guys use to take over software have actually been patched by vendors, months if not years ago. So just making sure that your Microsoft Office is up to date, that any of your dental-specific software is up to date, that your computer operating systems are up to date, that can help protect you from many of the threats out there. And by the way, that's also something you may not have to worry about because Henry Schein may take and do that for you. The final preparation tip I'm actually going to gloss over very quickly, but it's the backup. And I'm going to leave that to Tom to talk about how important it is. But basically, while there's lots of prevention techniques that can keep ransomware out, if it ever does get in, an easy way to avoid pain is simply to be able to recover your files, and then you don't have to worry about it. Moving to prevention, there's 2 high-level tips I want to share. The good news is if you have some antivirus, it does offer basic prevention to ransomware. The bad news, as I mentioned before, malware is morphing so quickly that pattern-based antivirus is not keeping up. Typically, pattern-based antivirus is anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days behind the latest version. And that's why threats like WannaCry spread despite people like NHS having antivirus. That's why you need to start considering more advanced malware controls that use more proactive detection techniques. WatchGuard has one of those controls in our advanced malware detection with APT blocker, but there's many other options available too that you can look at. Finally, the real defense to ransomware prevention is unfortunately not a silver bullet. There's no one thing you can do to guarantee you'll never get it, but really you should institute a layered security architecture. The more different types of security controls you have, the better protected you're going to be. Your firewall can prevent traffic you don't want, but there's going to be some traffic like email and web activity you want. That's where having additional services like network antivirus, like intrusion prevention, and like advanced threat protection can help find some of the threats that you actually are allowing in traffic through your firewall. So the more layers of defense you have, the better off you are at catching a number of these threats. And the good news is managing multiple layers of defense is not hard nowadays. There's actually things like WatchGuard's Unified Threat Management device, which is perfectly fit for even small dental offices that have all the different layers of defense in them to catch these sorts of threats. Better yet, through organizations like Henry Schein's TechCentral, they can actually take care of managing these devices for you. So it's an easy way for even the smallest business to get some pretty sophisticated security controls altogether. The final thing I do want to talk about, though, is response. In the worst case scenario, by the way, if you ever get ransomware, I highly recommend you don't pay it. Now, I know speaking to a dental practice or if it was a healthcare institute, that's the hardest for me to say not to pay, only because I realize if you're a health service in any way, if you have patient data, it's critical to life and death services. There could even be, you may need to know someone's allergies before you put them under. So patient data is very important. The problem is, paying ransomware is what's proving this business, this criminal business practice is working to these bad guys, and paying ransomware will ensure we'll continue to get more and more ransomware in the future. Unfortunately, there's been many organizations, including the authorities themselves, that have succumbed to paying. But really, this is something I think you should never do, and in the worst case, it should be a last resort. So make sure to do all the preparation and the backup necessary to protect yourself beforehand so you don't have to worry about that. So that's some quick highlights about the threat landscape and ransomware. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Alan, who's going to introduce Tom.
Thank you, Corey. That information was very valuable. We now have the opportunity to hear from Tom Grave, who is a Senior VP over at CTERA, who helps TechCentral provide our hybrid backup services. Tom runs CTERA's worldwide marketing operations, and he brings close to 2 decades of experience in high-tech marketing and product management, which makes him a very valuable partner with TechCentral. Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Thank you, Corey. That was excellent, very educational as always. And thanks for everybody for joining us today and taking a little bit of time off your busy schedules. Really appreciate it. So just a quick word about CTERA as a setup, and then I'll follow on from a lot of the things that Alan was describing. So about CTERA, we're a partner with Henry Schein. We've been partners for some time. And we're a technology vendor for one of the solution sets that Henry Schein TechCentral provide to their dental practices. In terms of our mission, we enable the digital transformation of enterprise file services which is a long sentence that basically means we're focused on the files in the office environment, which is exactly the type of data that we're managing in the dental practices. And when we think about files, we think about them sort of holistically, storing them, using them, sharing them, and most importantly, as we've been talking about in this session, protecting them with offsite data protection that we'll get into. In terms of our customers, we've been around since 2008, so we do have a long list of high-end enterprise sort of household name companies. So interestingly, you can see right in the middle of the slide, NHS, that's the National Health Service in England that Corey referenced. So they're one of our customers, and we actually were involved with their recovery recently. And same thing, Telefonica is another customer of ours that Corey mentioned. You can see their logo is sort of the script over in the lower left, and Swisscom as well. So we were designed actually for service providers at the beginning, providing the service providers like Henry Schein with tools and software to deliver services to their end customers, and in this case, the dental practices. So a lot of our companies are the large Fortune 500 type companies that buy directly from CTERA, but a lot of them are more the SMB mid-sized companies that Corey was describing that are buying through some of these large service providers. And in either case, they're getting the same software, the same technology that we're going to describe today, which is very relevant to the protection and security that Corey was describing. And I'll go right back to Corey's slide about backup, because that is so there's a long list of things to do on the prevention side, but eventually people will get hacked, and it's sort of a given that either you've been hacked and you know it, or you've been hacked and you don't yet know it, but you will. And that's beyond just ransomware. That's sort of a truism. But the cyber criminals, unfortunately, are getting more and more sophisticated, because as Corey described, it is big business. It's a booming business, and unfortunately, there's a lot of incentives for very smart people to go sort of over the dark side, and so we only see these things increasing. But backup is sort of the last defense, where you're not preventing the occurrence, but you're quickly recovering from the occurrence by rolling back to a previous version that wasn't affected. And so that's where we talk about having redundant backups, encrypted backups. So if that data itself gets in the wrong hands, it's not readable by anybody who's not authorized. And automation is key, and I'll come back to the automation point a number of times today. Back to WannaCry, though, because this is interesting, sort of following on from what Corey was describing. So again, as Corey said, May 12th, David, it'll be remembered for some time, because this is the first time there was this worldwide massive attack of ransomware at this level, hitting organizations around the globe all at once, and not giving a lot of there's no time to figure out the preventative measures. By the time people realized what the vulnerability was and were able to patch it, hundreds and thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of organizations had already been impacted. And so what's interesting is the way to describe it. So it starts off innocently enough. What happened? Oh, well, your files, you're not able to access your files. They've been encrypted. And then it gets more aggressive. Maybe you're busy looking for a way to recover your files, but don't waste your time. Nobody can recover your files without our decryption services. So they have what starts out as looking like a relatively innocent little pop-up window suddenly becomes very aggressive, demanding, as Alan described, $300 in cyber currency and Bitcoin for every system impacted. So, and large organizations have many servers or many laptops, and so the ransom that's being requested quickly starts to add up. But what's interesting is this statement is not true about don't look for a way, nobody can help you but us. A very simple and really old-fashioned backup is a solution. So what's amazing is it's a very sophisticated crime, taking advantage of small windows of vulnerability and using very advanced hacking techniques to deploy this type of software on a global basis. But the remedy, once it happens to you, is actually quite simple, which is simply going back to a version that that you have a good, clean copy before the ransomware hit. And so CTERA's been involved in a number of cases. We've been tracking, maybe not since '89, but we've been tracking ransomware for some time because we recognize right off the bat that that this is going to be a growing segment of the sort of hacking industry, and that backup is a really good vehicle for recovery if it happens. Again, it shouldn't give people any relief about not taking these preventative measures, because clearly that's the best scenario. But on the assumption that bad things will still get through all the preventative measures that people put in place, this is a good system last defense. And so this company, S.J. Lewis, faced sort of an existential crisis when they were locked up. This wasn't WannaCry. This was the Cerber ransomware that was a couple of years ago. But basically, it's a mid-size construction general contractor business. They're being ransomed to the tune of $100,000. But not only that, the data was locking up all their contracts and all of their most important files. And they felt that either they have to cough up $100,000, which would be a significant hit to their cash flow, or face even worse consequences if they didn't recover this data. And then they realized that they worked with us, and they realized that they could really roll back and recover. And so they were hit by 2 successive attacks, and they were back up and running within just a few hours. First was the initial panic, and then was the relief that all those files are safe. They may have lost a couple incremental changes since the last version, but nothing as devastating as what it first seemed. And we've been involved in a number of these. So not only did we help S.J. Lewis a couple of years ago, we also helped the state of Texas recover. They had 30,000 files locked with the recent ransomware hit. And Live Nation, which is the company behind Ticketmaster and a lot of concert venues around the world, was also recently hit with tens of thousands of files across many PCs, across many offices, not just one office, locked up. And similar to what Corey is saying, Live Nation is a big company, but the attack was at the local level, at the office level, and that's where the vulnerability first occurred, where somebody accidentally downloaded the wrong thing, locking up lots of files. But that would have been quite consequential to that venue, and they were able to roll back. So that's ransomware and backup, and I'm going to describe to you in a lot more detail how backup exactly works and the type of backup services that Henry Schein can provide. But just wanted to follow on from Corey's education about ransomware and just give some real world examples of how a relatively simple solution, as long as it's in place, can really help. And before we go on, we wanted to also do a survey question, because we're talking all about backup today, and it's always good to start with a question to get a read on the audience about where you are with your backup practices. So the survey question is quite simple. How confident are you that your backup strategy will allow you to recover from a potential data loss? And data loss, I think as everybody knows, is not just from ransomware, but other occurrences as well. So we'll pause for a moment here, see how people feel about their current backup strategies, and then we'll move on. All right, we'll take one more minute. We've got a number of people who've clicked. A few haven't yet. We'll make sure we get the data. It's always interesting to see the live data and then take it from there. All right, we're almost at 50% of the respondents. So you can still answer after I continue, but let's move on and push the results. And these are actually interesting results. Surprisingly good results. So congratulations to the audience members. Mostly when we show this, we see stats more around the somewhat sure. But here in this case, we have some people following good best practices, and we have 57% of the folks on the call are very confident in their ability to recover data. about 40% are somewhat sure, and then about 5% not too sure at all. And so again, congratulations. So what we often see is that people fall into somewhat sure. Even myself, I've been in backup and data protection for, as Alan said, close to 20 years. And even I usually answer somewhat sure, because you're never sure until you actually perform it and see the data come back and know that that you're able to recover. But this is good. So this speaks to the importance of best practices, and I'm going to take you through some of those. Hopefully, I don't undermine the 57% that are confident, but for the 40 or 45% who aren't sure, we can take you through some of the key tips. Before I do that, we spent a lot of time on ransomware. Ransomware is making the headlines. Ransomware is a significant problem that's only going to grow over the next couple of years. But the remedy, as I said, is an old-fashioned remedy, and it's because people have been backing up data for a long time by various means, and the practices of backup are getting better and better. But the most common reason for data loss is good old-fashioned human error. Humans are imperfect. They're creative. They're smart. They're emotional. They don't always pay attention to exactly what they're doing. And accidentally deleting files is a thing that happens, or making changes to a file they didn't mean to make and not being able to unwind those. So as much as ransomware gets the headlines, human error is accounting still for about 75% of the data loss out there. And again, it's because most people who are using computers are not IT professionals. They're not aware of the potential challenges, and their first step is to call IT if an IT department exists at all, and if not, to hopefully call a service provider or something to try to recover. So theft is also not just advanced ransomware theft, but literally data like thumb drives walking out of the office, or entire systems walking out of the office. So that's actually like data leaking out of the environment into the wrong hands, and that's where you need encryption, but you also need the ability to go back to another version of the file so you can continue the operations of the business. And of course, fire, and there's water damage. So there's a lot of things that happen in the real world, and if you think about it, backup is really like an insurance policy, just like you have literal insurance for fire and water damage to the dental equipment, to the office environment. So if there's a flood or a fire, you contact State Farm or another insurance broker and get back up and running as quickly as possible. But those companies don't insure the data. There's no means of doing that. The only way to do it is to take matters in your own hands and make sure that you have redundant copies. Not only redundant copies, but there's a number of very specific best practices that you want to think about. And that's where we put together, and this is just really a high-level summary. Of course, there's books written about proper data protection, but there's a few very important things to keep in mind. So for the ones that, as you answered the survey, whether you fell into the very sure bucket or the somewhat sure, you want to make sure you're following these best practices. If you're not, then there's some simple things you can do to do it. And if you are, you want to make sure that you keep up to date and keep your employees informed of the processes and so forth. So keeping redundant copies in two locations is the most fundamental. You want to have the local copy within the office for fast recovery. So say Tom deletes a file accidentally, needs it back. The best case scenario is that a recent copy is already in the office and you can quickly recover, and hopefully recover sort of in a self-satisfying manner where Tom can go in and get his file back. Hopefully it's recovering off disk and not tape and doesn't require any human activity to go physically load something up. So that's the ideal scenario for local recovery, but that doesn't prevent against fire or flood or some other physical damage, and that's where you want to have an off-site copy as well. So that's the most basic, both local and remote. You want to automate everything. And so in the old days, backup was a very manual process. So you run some backup software at a specific time of day. Typically, it's going to go to tape. You have people physically handling and managing tapes. In a lot of small businesses, it was often the the owner or manager of the office taking tapes, literally taking them home. Sometimes they would use a third party to keep them somewhere safer. But tapes have a lot of downsides. They go missing, they break, they take a long time to get back if you're going to recover from tape. And tape is not something that's used too much in the SMB environment anymore, but it does exist out there. And it's got some qualities that are good, but for the most part, it's not automatic, and it's got some flaws. So you want to keep things automated and as much reduced dependency on extraneous products and services as possible. You have the primary method of storing data and using data in the office environment, and the less things you have to manage, the better, just as a general rule of thumb. And there's a lot of products now today that have sort of these integrated data protection services that don't require use of third-party software, third-party services, and so forth. And then, of course, because we're talking about sensitive information, you have to keep in mind the unique considerations for personally identifiable information as well as sensitive personal information. And so those often have requirements above and beyond just, off-site, on-site. They talk to encryption, and they talk to the ability to make sure you're masking out sensitive customer information. And so this is where CTERA comes into play. So among several things we do when it comes to file services management is ultra secure cloud-based backup and data protection. And we deliver that in two ways. It's a hardware-software combination that Henry Schein provides to central clients, and it's centered around what we call the cloud storage gateway. So this is a fully integrated appliance that has a lot of capacity for the office environment, up to 4 terabytes, which is pretty sizable. We have larger models, but for the SMB environment, 4 terabytes is a significant amount of data. It handles up to about 50 users. And that's assuming about 80 to 100 gig on average per user, gets you to about 50 users. And what that is providing the local environment for sharing files, storing files in an office environment. Typical Windows directory type thing where you have your different drives for different practices, different groups within the company. But what's happening is it's doing WAN optimized, which means it's very efficient on the bandwidth, back up to an offsite data center, in this case, back to the Henry Schein cloud. And it's providing rich functionality that's very simple to use. It's plug and play. I can attest to that. I actually have one in my office, and it was quite simple to deploy. Gives the end users file level recovery. So if Tom does delete his Excel file, Tom can go into the system and retrieve it without needing to call an IT person or to call the administrative state of staff or somebody. It also does what we call bare metal backup, which is the full system recovery. So if Tom doesn't just delete a file but actually breaks his laptop, the entire image of the laptop and all the files associated with it can be restored as well using this product. It's robust, so it's got internal high availability disk drives. So if a drive within it fails, the data is all accessible. Nothing fails. Nothing goes down. And it's got very robust encryption, 256-bit AES encryption, and that's true across the chain from data at rest in the dental office to data in flight across the bandwidth to data at rest in the Henry Schein cloud, and that's really critical when it comes to managing sensitive data. So there's two things we're showing here. In addition to having the what we call the appliance or the gateway, there's software that runs at the endpoints. The endpoints are the workstations or the laptops or even mobile devices that are affiliated with the office. But at the endpoint level, you have the backup running against the files on a periodic basis and sending data directly to the cloud. And then or in the office environment, you can send it to to and from the cloud gateway, and then that gets sent to the cloud. So every change with every file that's made is always getting synced up to the offsite level. It's all automated, and there's no need for manual intervention for that. So if bad things happen, fire, flood, theft, ransomware, it's easy, and in fact, it's almost trivial to go back to older versions that are not necessarily older versions, but previous versions that are in the cloud environment. Because it's all automated, it's very fast. We're very efficient with the bandwidth because we're doing what's called deduplication, which means any data that already exists in the cloud doesn't get sent again. It just it sends a little bit of metadata to point to it, and it gives a lot of assurance because everything is automated and sort of guarantees business continuity. So, just in addition to what I've presented so far, it's got really robust functionality. Even though it's very simple to use, it gives integrated backup services, so it's easy for the end user to manage. It supports the Windows functionality for restore previous versions, so it feels very integrated and natural within a Windows environment. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Its ability to access files from a browser, so if you're traveling, you can tap into what's called the portal in the Henry Schein Cloud and retrieve files directly through a browser environment. And again, it's designed for the end user, so it's very much self-service oriented. For the SMB, dental practice type office where you're not going to invest in a large IT staff, it's sort of ideal. And this just shows how ransomware can be recovered from. So if you see in the middle there, there's a little drop-down window that says versions. This is within the software itself, so you can an end user can go into any folder or any file even, click on the versions and see all the versions that exist that have been backed up over time, and just open up any file. And so that way, again, if you're looking at a ransomware environment, you can look at when the ransomware happened, roll back to the best copy before ransomware, recover very easily. It's the same recovery process for any other issue that happens. Very robust security with 256-bit encryption. The retention allows for very specific policies that the practice can put in place. A lot of auditing, a lot of access control functionality. So beyond just the ability to back up and recover, it gives the IT team or even the managers in the office the ability to very specifically tune this beyond that in terms of access control, who can see what data, who has the authority to access which files, and so forth. And so we want to save a little bit of time for Q&A, and I want to turn it to Brian as well. So I'll just wrap up on this slide, which is that this integrated cloud storage gateway provided by Henry Schein with CTERA standing behind it is sort of a best-of-breed solution to a lot of the things we talked about. Ransomware, which is very much the hot topic, but also these traditional needs for backup. And again, I want to thank Alan and Corey, and let me pass it over to Brian.
Hey, thank you very much. I just want to wrap up. We're right at the end of our hour, and just want to, really thank everybody for joining us and explain, some of these security offers that have been discussed, and a lot of them are absolute necessities for our offices and protecting our data. One of the things that we offer at TechCentral is a free security assessment. We can go into your office and basically give a health report of your network, your firewall, your antivirus, and your backup. And we're, again, there's no obligation to it, but there's a report that we can print for you and go over with you, and then make recommendations. Certainly, the technologies that we discussed today will be some of them. And the 57% of you that feel strongly that your network is in great security shape, kudos to you. And with the security assessment that we can provide for you, that'll help secure that even more and help you out. So again, we're more than happy to meet up in your office and send our reps out. We're all over the country, so any of you that are calling in, we have representation in your areas to help and help you out with those needs. We also have our support that will monitor those security devices, and there's, starting at $129 a month, it's unlimited support, and it does monitor your network and the security devices that you've acquired through us. Again, thank you very much, and we'll move on to the question and answers. Ellen?
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. And thank you, Tom, for sharing that valuable information about protecting patient data. Unfortunately, we probably won't have any time to do question and answers today, but if you have submitted any questions through the Q&A app, we will go ahead and reach out to you via email in the next little bit here. Also, you can contact our team directly to request a free assessment by visiting the website at www.hstechcentral.com/security-assessment, or you can call our team directly at 844-457-1320, and there they can provide you with more information about all of the solutions provided by TechCentral, including the support plan. Again, I want to thank you each for joining us today and thank our presenters.